Alright, I know I said last time that we were going to move on to uh, extracting data from the story itself. I think that there are still a couple of steps that we could do beforehand that's going to make extracting that data a little bit easier, and we'll be able to extract more from the story when we do get to the point of extracting specific data points. So, instead, this video, I would like to focus on developing the family tree and showing how each character is related to every other character. But there's something we have to do even before we get to that. And last time, if you remember in our last video, we established our sequence of scenes and we figured out which character was the point of view character for each of our scenes. And we could do that for most of them, but unfortunately we were not able to connect a specific scene to a specific character for Tim and David. We know one of them narrates scene 2 and that the other one narrates scene 11, but we don't know which. I've actually gone back and edited the story so that we do actually know the answer to this. Instead of saying my older brother, which is what it said before, it now says my brother David in scene 11. So once we get to this point in the puzzle, we are able to distinguish between Tim and David and which one narrates scene 11 and which one narrates scene 2. That section of the text I just showed you was from scene 11. So we're going to go ahead and assign that one to Tim, and we are going to assign David to scene 2. This is going to make our family tree a little bit easier to fill out and really possible to fill out, whereas otherwise it would not be a simple task. So part of the reason why I am doing these videos as well is to ensure that this is a solvable puzzle. I've done it before, solved it completely through, but I haven't followed this specific solve path. So I do want to somebody who goes through it in this way, determining die rolls first, determining the alphabetical order sequence. I want that person to be able to not hit a roadblock at that point and to be able to fill out the sequence once they have all this other information available to them. All right, so now that we have this sequence of scenes firmly established, and we have every scene assigned to each character, we can use that information to determine who they're talking about when they're talking about, say, their parents or their uncles or their siblings. So I've actually taken the liberty of constructing a family tree here. This one is centered on Alistair. And when we figure out what his relations to some different people are, that's going to be very relevant because of the succession and the line of succession established in scene 1. And that should tell us who is first in line, essentially, to inherit the helm. All right, so how do we know how Alistair is connected to the rest of the family? Our big hint is going to come from scene 7. Perhaps the most information given in one place about the family tree in the story is when, in this very first section, Uncle Billy says, "For the family photo, I want siblings and couples next to each other. So from my left to my right, let's have James, Alistair, Marilyn, and Elizabeth." Later on, the narrator, who we have established is Roger, says, talks about or references both his mom and his dad. And his mom is addressing Alistair when she chastises Violet. And then his dad responds to that to that when Roger's mother addresses Alistair. So this tells us that Alistair and Marilyn are a couple, and that Alistair and James are siblings, which is corroborated later on when we have I've done it, my other uncle whispers from behind me, because he is next to Alistair. And then we have Marilyn, Alistair's wife, and then Elizabeth is going to end up being Marilyn's sister. And then Billy, of course, will be Elizabeth's husband. So we have that here. Marilyn being Alistair's wife, Jim being his brother. And we also know that Roger is their child. We've also established that Violet is also the child of Alistair and Marilyn and is Roger's sibling. Okay. What's our next easiest step? 12, or scene 12, specifically states that, or explicitly states that Roger and Bridget are married. It's kind of hinted at in some other places, especially scene 6, but also scene 10. But Roger and Bridget are married, and Roger mentions his daughter as well in scene 12. It's not clear from that scene who his daughter is, but we do know that David is Roger's grandson, or more specifically, that Roger and Bridget are David's grandfather, or grandmother and grandfather, respectively. And we know that Tim is David's brother, so we know that there's someone in between the two of them. And we know that David narrates scene 2. We know that his mom is at least mentioned in scene 2. Mom calls my name, but I don't answer. And the real telling part comes here in scene 5. That tells us who this missing link is between Roger and his grandchildren. And that's going to be the point where this narrator, who we have established is Jane, says there's a couple things said about Jane. One of them is that this is Alistair Wheeler's granddaughter. So that tells us right away that Jane has to be the daughter of either Violet or Roger. And later on, it's said that Jane sees Aunt Violet consoling Aunt Melody. That tells us that Violet is her aunt and that Roger is her father. Okay, so we have this portion of the family tree filled out. If it's not clear from scene 12, the intended takeaway of that scene is that Roger is not, in fact, the biological father of Jane. Greg is. And that is basically the entire purpose or reason for the duel taking place after scene, chronologically after scene 12. Okay. So we've established this much. We're going to leave Anthony out of this for a little bit. We will establish why we know that he is connected to Jane or married to Jane and the father of these two later on. I will say that we do know immediately that Jane is widowed. That comes from scene number 4, where it's said, Jane gets especially homesick this time of year, and since she was widowed, she really needs some support right now. Okay. And we also know that from scene 12 Tim can't sleep without the teddy bear his dad gave him before he died. So that tells us that Jane has been widowed. We don't know by who. We'll establish how we know that it's Anthony later on. Let's see here. Okay, so we've kind of established Roger's side of the family. Let's move on to Violet. We know that Amy is Violet's child based on what we've seen of scene number 4. We have discussed this already, but I'm just going to go over it real quick once again because that was in reference to a different puzzle at the time. Specifically, we know that Amy is the narrator of 4, and when she talks about Mom, Uncle Roger had called Mom and asked her to join him for a board game night, and then Uncle Roger addresses Amy's mother as Violet. I know you're busy, Violet. Okay, so that tells us that Amy is Violet's mother. How do we know that Melody is also Amy's mother? That comes from the fact that comes from a couple of different things. Here we see, so Tim sticks out his tongue and Mom picks up the dice. We go into this little aside, and then after that, someone else claims doubles. Ma exclaims, doesn't that mean she gets to go again? The implication or intended implication here is that Ma is someone other than Mom. So basically that Amy has 2 mothers. And the reason why we know that it's Melody, there are several clues linked in. The most obvious one is, once again, that scene that we talked about from scene 5, where Jane sees Aunt Violet consoling Aunt Melody. And then later on in scene 10, when Roger tells Melody, I have a suspicion the 2 of you will get along very well, referring to Melody and Violet. Alright, so we've established that. We've also established that Jim is the brother of Alistair, and we've established that Greg is the father of Wanda and Chris before. That mostly comes from scene 12 and a little bit from scene 1. So the next step is going to be figuring out how Greg fits into the family tree. And this is probably the most obscure connection, but there are a few reasons to know how he is connected. Let's go back to scene 8, which is Greg's point of view scene. And let's see, he talks about his dad. Notably, his dad is works at a lab. Aren't you supposed to be at work? And later on he says, the folks at the lab, Greg's father says, the folks at the lab aren't open-minded enough to change their course in light of recent developments in microbiology. Earlier in scene 7, Greg speaks to Roger, the narrator of this scene, and says, I've always wondered what your mom's side of the family was like. This tells us that Greg probably is not a sibling of Violet and Roger. And we also get further confirmation later on when in the Greg's point of view scene, when he talks about the family who's moving over from Arizona. And he says, after a successful stint as a car salesman, my uncle wants to try his hand at venture capitalism. Scene 7 has a reference to Roger's father investing in family, specifically investing in Jim. The call is supposed to iron out logistical details. Greg is silently looking forward to it because Roger has always made fun of my height by singing the little teapot song. This is all to suggest, all of this is leading to the conclusion that Greg is actually Jim's child, because we are aware that Jim is the inventor of the aging freeze serum, which would have indicated or led us to suspect that he has some sort of biological history. Okay. This is most of the family tree that we're going to worry about. All of this stair-step stuff up here is just in a reference to scene 3, where Jim is talking to his grandfather, who I've designated as the storyteller. And then the storyteller is talking about his grandfather in that scene, who was the duelist, and then the duelist's father was the OG Wheeler who earned the gold watch and who came up with the family motto of Wheeler's Roll West. All right, so that gives us our information on the family tree, which will be useful for some of the other categories in our Sudoku grid that we need to determine, which we will move on to in my next video.